Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, COVID-19 Design Playbook. My name is Pamela and I will be the webinar organizer for today. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. We want to make sure today's presentation is extremely valuable for you, so we ask that you submit all questions by clicking on the question button in the control panel and typing your question. Our presenters today are Jeffrey Myers, Scott Maloney, and Mark Woods. Jeffrey Myers, owner and principal at DS Architecture. Jeffrey is a recognized thought leader in the architectural and engineering industry. He has presented to a wide range of audiences locally, regionally, and nationally, with a focus on how well-designed buildings can improve the human life experience. Scott Maloney is a registered architect with 24 years experience working on thousands of projects across the United States and multiple markets, including commercial, retail, hospitality, senior living, safety, service, and criminal justice. Scott's keen interest is working with clients to develop operational and functional designs that make you think smarter about your physical assets. Currently, he is working on over 1.3 million square feet of social distancing and COVID-19 temporary permanent measures in a variety of facilities. Mark Woods is registered mechanical engineer from the University of Buffalo and director of engineering for K2M Design. Mark has an extensive experience in overall mechanical system design, commissioning/troubleshooting, construction supervision, construction cost estimating, indoor air quality evaluation, life cycle cost analysis, HVAC controls, as well as the identification and implementation of energy optimization strategies. Currently, he is leading the criteria design for HVAC and plumbing COVID-19 retrofit measures for Cuyahoga County. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panelist, Jeff.
Good morning, everybody. Appreciate you guys taking the opportunity to join us and learn a little bit about how COVID-19 is affecting the architectural engineering industry. Specifically, we want to talk about how it's affecting us currently, but also long-term. A lot of people are saying this is unprecedented times, and while we've never had something like COVID-19 affect our industry, we've had several events in the past, which we'll do some precedents that have affected major change in our industry. We're going to talk about the current modifications or the immediate modifications that a lot of you are seeing in hospitality and retail. We're also going to show you a tool by the AIA, American Institute of Architects, on how to better evaluate your own facilities, or at least get that conversation started. We're really going to dive into what the future long-term likely holds because of COVID. It was a great introduction of the three of us. The two firms are very similar in that we are culture-based firms. We consider ourselves experts in public projects and hospitality projects, which are two of the main areas that are being affected. DS Architecture is a Cleveland-based firm, regionally based, while K2M is a national-based firm, and Scott will talk about that in a second. I think the thing that combines the two of us is that we're both hired by Cuyahoga County to start implementing their COVID-19 upgrades. So we're on the forefront of how to modify existing conditions and ultimately modify new builds with COVID-19 in mind. I'm the principal at DS Architecture, and I'm in charge of our public safety and civic architecture division. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Jeff. So Scott Maloney, I'm the owner and founder of K2M Design. My background over the last 24 years has been largely in planning and public work architecture, and so I've got a very high level of enthusiasm and drive to really strategically help organizations and businesses think smarter about their assets. You heard that in the beginning. And I've been very fortunate to be at the forefront of even social distancing starting back in March this year, where we were helping businesses and government entities kind of plan their initial reopenings, their kind of secondary reopenings, and then of course now looking at the temporary measures that we'll be putting in place to provide an adequate level of safety and security for the employees as well as people visiting our buildings. And so I'm joined by Mark Watts. Mark's the Director of Engineering for Cose, and I'll let him introduce himself. Mark?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I have over 25 years of experience, which means I'm old, as a contractor and engineer. A lot of experience in HVAC, indoor air quality, and commissioning, troubleshooting, those types of areas have been my focus. I wrote a lot of the Cleveland Clinic's design standards, a lot of healthcare background, a lot of infectious control, filtration, those types of things, which obviously is what we're here to talk about today.
So just a little bit more about our firm, DS Architecture, and architecture in general. Architects, very similar to doctors and lawyers, have to take a oath, and our oath as architects and engineers is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the conversation that we have today. As I mentioned, I head up our public safety and civic architecture group, but our firm actually has 5 different studios. 4 of those are very, very important to COVID. Probably the most important would be healthcare studio, where we do work at the clinic, Metro Health, and Akron Children's. And that's kind of the forefront of this because they've been dealing with infectious diseases for a long, long time, and the different ways that you try to limit the exposure of those. We have a higher education studio, and that's a big topic as you're hearing some universities are reopening full students, and some are opening at half, and some are trying to go all online. We have a hospitality group, which is really focused on restaurant and retail. And that, along with my group, the public safety group, are the 4 that make us up. So I bring a very unique and diverse demographic of different types of projects that we'll be talking about today. Scott, do you want to hit on K2M a little bit?
Certainly. So K2M is a regionally diverse firm, a national practice. We've got 9 offices across the United States, from Cleveland to Key West to Arkansas, and everywhere points in between. Certainly, it's been a very interesting few months here as we have been adapting and proactively approaching, our sort of new normal. And I know that's a buzzword that was probably worn out by the time April hit of this year. But really, as we start to think about this and we use our intelligence and leverage the intelligence of this incredible team to really start to think about how we better program our space, how we better work within our space, and you're going to see a lot of those results that are going to come through here. I've been very fortunate because of the scale of the work that we've been doing over the last few months relative to this planning work to be engaged with a wide variety of experts across the industry, for instance, UH and infectious disease controls. And there's been a lot of sharing and evolution that's occurred. And so, as we sit here and we look at what we've learned and how we are applying it, we're developing solutions that are longer term solutions that are going to adapt buildings to this new way of being able to function. We're also looking at how we create buildings into the future and make those as good as we possibly can make them, and solutions that really truly fit all budgets.
We see there being 5 areas of the built environment that are going to be, really kind of scrutinized. Obviously, the way floor plans and the way we are set up with different desks or different equipment if you're manufacturing. So that floor plan analysis we'll talk a little bit about. You have the social distancing that you see, physical separation with barriers. The one that you're probably not seeing yet, or at least you're not recognizing yet, and Mark will talk a lot about this, is a lot of the implementation of safety standards are going to come through the mechanical systems. And mechanical systems are a big part of controlling the environment, including infectious diseases. So these are the 5 main areas that we're kind of going to try to talk about today. We'll jump into a little bit of historic precedents. The current building code, or the modern United States building code, was created because of the Chicago fire of 1871, when the buildings were made out of a lot of wood. And at that time, they really changed over to, and what you see in a lot of downtowns is no wood framing construction, and they really moved to masonry and clay type of structures. And then there's another fire maybe a decade or so later where they completely outlawed any timber framing and started creating firewalls between the buildings. And this just gives an example of how an event, immediately changed some things, but longer term, the building code was actually created to kind of make sure that these things didn't occur in the future. Similarly, and more recently, in 2003, there was a Station nightclub where they had an event with pyrotechnics, and they had actually locked one of the doors to prevent people from sneaking into the facility. And unfortunately, it caught fire, and there were a lot of casualties. And so again, immediately, the local fire departments increased the number of inspections that were required. They reduced the number of occupants, very similar to what you're seeing here with the concept of 50% occupants allowed. But longer term, what they did is they increased the requirements for fire suppression. It used to be one for every fire suppression for every 300 people, and it went down to 100 people. They required closer doors or more doors to egress from the building. Again, you had these immediate changes, and then you have these longer term changes. Most recently, you have the 9/11 implementation process, and this is what's going to occur with COVID-19. Is you have the event, which Scott mentioned happened about 3 months ago, where we really had the shutdown of restaurants and bars. You had the mandate of social distancing, and you're starting to see a lot of these immediate operational changes, limiting the number of people, limiting the hours, dedicated hours for seniors, et cetera, et cetera. And we're not, the three of us are not experts in the operational administrative changes that will occur. We are basically reacting to those and how the physical environment is being changed. And so you're seeing a lot of the immediate physical changes, such as the dividers that are being put up on maybe bars, or you'll see the pathways that are happening at grocery stores on how you enter and exit the building. We understand and know that the government is already meeting to talk about long-term changes. And we actually saw this, and I've been saying this for about a month and a half now on different talks, but we're starting to see the different levels of COVID with the different colors of, green, yellow, orange, red, and I know Cuyahoga County is level 3, which means we should have masks on. So you're starting to see the development of immediate legislation. Ultimately, you'll see the development of long-term legislation. And again, we really think that's going to be related to the mechanical systems overall. And once those happen, you'll start to see the finalized operational and physical changes. And we could see or perceive that once a facility is up and they have maybe 4 different layouts based upon green, yellow, orange, and red, that get the certification from the local health department or fire department and saying, yeah, if we go to code orange, you're pre-certified to set up this way and you don't need to get an inspection. Whereas if you don't have that, they might come out and check and have extra regulations. So we're going to go from the current event, which happened 3 months ago, and probably try to project out about 18 months as we discuss. One of the big things we want to bring to light, and we're going to share a tool, and Scott's really going to dive into this AIA analysis tool that they provided. In general, though, a lot of, especially public places, retail places, restaurants, they're really changing their environment for the COVID-19 social distancing of 6 feet, 50% occupancy, which we're actually finding out is by the time you actually implement all that, you're probably more at 30-35% occupancy. You're starting to see these temporary dividers put up, tables moved, and me and Scott across the country and me locally, we're seeing where people are putting tables in front of fire exits, or they're limiting the American Disabilities Act requirements for accessibility for all. And so as you take a look at these immediate provisions to meet COVID, you also need to be thinking about the long term on how it's affecting other health, safety, and welfare measures. So that's where this analysis tool that we're going to share comes in, and it's where our industry of architects and engineers can really help make sure that we're implementing not just the COVID-19 requirements, but also all code requirements. So I'm going to hand it over to Scott here in a second. We're going to talk about assessing your current facilities, and it doesn't matter what type of facility you have. It could be from manufacturing to office to hotel, etc. You got to develop a plan, and this tool that we're going to go over helps you develop that plan, and ultimately you got to implement that plan. And with that, I want to hit real quick on an example of a multifaceted project. It's a church gathering hall, and what we want to hit on here is this type of space has many different uses. It has the high risk areas such as the gathering hall, the fitness area, and the stage, and that needs to be assessed one way and a plan developed one way and implemented one way. Whereas your moderate and low risk, low risk being your private offices, moderate maybe being hallways and kitchens, will have a different assessment tools and different plans that need to be implemented. This is the introduction to the AIA that we were talking about. It's available online, and we'll provide a link for everybody at the end of that. Basically, there's 5 steps to this as you look at it. The elimination, which is social isolation, which maybe works very well for COVID, but we're hearing and understand that people with mental illness or people who are actually suffering from COVID, social isolation is actually very poor for them. So it's a first step. It's a immediate measure. What we want to move towards is more engineering controls, as we talked about. We think that's the heart of a lot of these long-term solutions. You have administrative controls on how you operate. Do you have multiple shifts for your factory when you still only have one to limit the amount of exposure people have? And then ultimately, we do see an increase, a likely long-term increase in PPEs, especially in the healthcare sector. And I'll turn it over to Scott to talk a little bit more specifically about this assessment.
Thanks very much, Jeff. So, as we are looking at this, there are 5 basic components that Mark and I will work on here. And the first is really about the site and the sense of arrival as you're approaching a building and as you enter through the building envelope itself, and what sort of things are being done to address on the exterior skin of a particular building, and then really dive into the interior environments. Fixtures, furnishings, but also measures that are being taken on the inside of facilities to really showcase what's happening. And I'll give you a couple of different examples of administrative space that you'll be able to see and work from. Go ahead. So when we look at the site and the site arrival and that checklist, we start to look at what sort of things are really most important. And so a lot of our buildings, especially in downtown settings, we have taxi, ride share, delivery services. There's a lot of interaction that's occurring from the street to the building itself from a vehicular standpoint. You certainly, if you've been out in the world in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, you certainly see a lot of new different types of staging that's occurring with cars in terms of, coming and picking up food at a restaurant, people bringing stuff outside to you, whether you're standing there waiting in a queuing line for food to be brought out. I mean, there's a wide variety of things that are actually occurring, and, controls being placed on people, quantities of people that are being let into buildings. And so you get that social distancing cues, both on the exterior of the building as well as on the interior itself. And as you look at this diagram that you see here, using Jeff's example of the gathering hall, you can see that a lot of buildings of what we're experiencing are reducing the number of points of entry into the facility. Keep in mind, these are extremely high touch areas, and they are things that require a lot of continued maintenance work on in order to be able to make sure that they're clean and they're safe for the people that are coming into the buildings. And so limiting the number of entrance points is something that certainly is highly recommended. And you can't lock them off. Certainly, like, you looked at the example that we showed earlier in terms of the stage and the concert that was occurring and locking doors so people can't come in other directions. That is absolutely not what we're advocating here, but we're advocating on an exit-only perspective. And so, we look at maintaining exits, certainly from a code perspective, your fire egress requirements, but really, really tightening down on the number of entrances that people are actually coming through in. And it does vary depending upon the state that you're in, the county that you're in, the city that you're in. Each one of these has their own different rules in terms of what you do once you enter a building. Some are still requiring temperature tests as you enter the building to make sure you have a basic 2-degree swing within your temperature. Some are requiring that you enter the building with PPVs and you are hand sanitizing right when you're standing there. Others are not requiring anything and you're just able to come into the building, and maybe there's a sign that says, hey, if you want to wear a mask, please do. Now, I've just spent the last 2 weeks traveling in 6 different states and have experienced quite a bit of variety in terms of how people are approaching their buildings. And so a lot of things that we're seeing, are definitely varying by location. So let's go on here. And we'll talk about the building envelope a little bit. And so really when we focus on the building envelope, it comes down to two basic things. One is certainly access to natural light. Certainly as much natural light as we are able to bring into the building creates a healthier environment for everybody. For facilities that are high volume, high volume transactions with customers, take for instance your McDonald's, your Burger King kind of concept. Installing drive-through pickup service windows certainly are something that's more prevalent today than it was even just a few months ago. And the other one, which is really kind of a big deal, is when you have access to outside air, being able to, open those windows up, certainly not on a day like today in Cleveland, but, being able to open up and let that building breathe and bring in as much outside air change as you possibly can, not relying just upon the mechanical system. But when you do rely on it, Mark will be talking about that in a little bit, but, being able to leverage that outside air and that change is certainly something that's extremely important. That said, predominantly building envelopes are not being touched at this point in time, and the majority of the work is actually occurring at the interior side of the building. And so when you look at any of the types of buildings that we're going into today, I mean, everybody's got a clear plastic sneeze guard in some degree, shape, fashion across their transaction counters. We see a lot of partitions being changed. We have certainly reductions in density in terms of the number of people that are inside of our facilities. I think that will continue in the longer term. You may have staggered work times, but there's certain physical measures that we can actually be taking at this point in time to be able to better protect us. You can shift your monitors, especially if you're in a large group of workstations, to be able to push people at least that 6 feet distance apart from each other so they're socially distanced. You can install transparent films over your work surfaces on a daily basis. So they're just put on and they're taken off on a daily basis. That's something that we're seeing on a worldwide perspective. You can install sort of barriers or higher partitions on your workstations in order to get up to 6 feet, 6 foot 8 inches, and if you are in a closer proximity to each other. And so there's a variety of physical methods, but really what we're seeing a lot right now is the social distancing side. And here's a great example of that. You can see that in here you've got green and predominantly red. I'll use this because I'm not perfectly seeing awesome colors, but you have various different types of workstations. So we're trying to get to that 50% occupancy level. And as Jeff mentioned, what we find when you socially distance, when you factor in codes, we're actually around about 35% overall in terms of occupant loads that fit into our spaces. But we're taking measures to be able to adapt our types of spaces. So a lot of the entrance doors now, we're putting automatic sensors on it, just like as you would walk into a grocery store. So you're not touching the handle of that front door. Break rooms are being limited in terms of occupancy, and there's more of a procedural process that is actually going on to cleaning different facilities. Package delivery, drop-off is being placed into one location, so people aren't actually coming deeply into the building and into your interior spaces, just from a function of safety. So you look at this, we've got a nice racetrack circulation, you've got separation of people. We're very limited in terms of the number of meetings that we're having. We're actually preferring and recommending video meetings certainly throughout this. You have this smaller interior office environment. So this is about, let's call it a 5,000 square foot space. And you can see that you've got the private office space that's there. We're not doing a lot of team meetings inside of those offices, but then we're socially distancing how we work through our workstations, putting in partitions, as we mentioned, and creating a series of different hand sanitizing stations at the entrance doors to facilities, as well as at all of the high touch areas. And so should this building, you sit there and you look at the elevator and the elevator button, there would be a hand sanitizing station at that location so you can sanitize your hands and then you press the button and be able to move on. That's something that I've experienced all across the country at this point, and certainly is a core recommendation that we're seeing. So I'll pass it over to Mark. We're going to talk a little bit about plumbing and really the exciting things about mechanical and plumbing systems and really what changes can occur here.
Thank you, Scott. Some of the more obvious plumbing measures to minimize the spread of pathogens include touchless fixtures, your water closets, urinals, lavatories and sinks, soap dispensers, towel dispensers as well. Eliminating water fountains, going to bottle fillers instead. Other considerations for pathogens on the plumbing side is Legionella growth in your plumbing system, especially buildings that have been shut down for a while. People working from home, then coming back. Dead legs in the system, stagnant water is good growth environment for Legionella. So flushing those systems, testing it is advisable. And then just general plumbing design for newer systems or renovated systems, eliminating dead legs, having adequate temperatures in the plumbing systems to reduce growth of Legionella. Similarly, on the HVAC side, cooling towers, location away from outside air intakes, windows, doors, pedestrian traffic, and proper chemical treatment are keys there. From the HVAC perspective, good starting point for discussing airborne infection control is the FGI ASHRAE 170 standard for airborne infection isolation rooms. Standard's been around for decades in the healthcare industry, and to me is a good context for this topic as far as air changes and filtration and those types of things. Next. I'm going to discuss some potential measures for treating air before it's applied to the building through the central HVAC system. I got these listed in descending order of effectiveness with respect to airborne pathogens, particularly viruses and coronaviruses. The ones I've highlighted are tend to be best suited for retrofit applications. A couple things to look at is increasing your supply air changes and filtration. There's some challenges associated with that. The supply fan capacity, size, and energy consumption can be barriers. The increased air movement in a space, noise, and comfort issues as well can be challenges. And then for retrofits, it's tough to implement these systems or size without a lot of excess capacity oftentimes to allow this to happen. Outside air quantities, those can be increased when the weather allows for that. Otherwise, challenges trying to cool, dehumidify, and heat the air properly. And then incorporating energy recovery devices after the fact can be challenging as well. On the filtration side, there's different levels of filtration. Each is most effective for removing a specific particle size. So the MERV 8 filtration basically removes the larger dust particles, pollen, spores. This is the minimum you should have in most buildings, your 2-inch filters you typically see. MERV 13 gets the next level down, your bacteria, smoke, and fine dust, and difficult to retrofit after the fact. Again, those tend to be 12 inches or more deep. Viruses are less than 1 micron and require higher level of filtration, MERV 17 or better. Your HEPA filters, those are even more difficult to implement in a retrofit application. Even in new construction, the pressure drop, the fan sizing, the first cost and operating costs can be pretty high. Carbon filtration is something typically that was done on outside air for VOCs and odor and smoke control, not real effective with viruses and coronaviruses. UVC tends to be better suited for these purposes. UVC utilizes ultraviolet C-band light to disrupt the DNA and RNA of viruses, coronaviruses, bacteria, mold, and fungus. It's got negligible pressure drop and very low energy consumption, which is obviously a plus. About a foot's required in an air handler to install this. So oftentimes that can be found in most existing retrofit applications. Historically, UVC is installed downstream of the chill water coil, keep the coil and the pans clean, and also to help with indoor air quality as well. UVC works best with static surfaces, not as well with moving air streams. So it's not as good an option as some other things, but it does help. And Next slide. Bipolar ionization utilizes high voltage electrodes to generate ions. These ions, like UVC, disrupts the DNA and RNA of viruses, coronaviruses, bacteria, mold, and funguses. Unlike UVC, it also causes particles to clump together, causing them to be more easily filtered and drop out of the air. Also removes VOC, smoke and odors from the airstream, so it's a lot of benefits. It has very negligible pressure drop, very low energy consumption, and very little space is required in an air handler to install these. So those are all great benefits. It's most effective in moving airstreams. It cleans the air in the air handler and as it's distributed to the spaces. It's usually installed in the inlet side of a fan, and it's well suited for retrofits as well as new construction. The last thing I want to talk about is humidification. Studies have been performed over the last 40 years or so that show the ideal relative humidity range for health in humans is between 40 and 60%. The table on this slide is from 1985 ASHRAE. It's been published originally, and as you can see, the blue in the center is where it's the best place for human health as far as the RH range. So typically in the summer, you're in that 50% range in indoor spaces. The winter's a challenge. Northeast, we're typically without humidification 20% or less in the winter oftentimes. So humidification can help tremendously with health benefits and minimizing the spread of pathogens. There are some challenges, a fair amount of infrastructure is required, water lines, space in the air handler, steam, electricity, RO oftentimes, depending on the system installed. Stainless steel sections of ductwork and air handler to collect the moisture and drain it properly. And then as well as the building itself, most buildings, older buildings, there's potential for condensation on window frames that aren't thermally broken and those types of things. So there are some challenges in retrofits, best suited for new construction or newer buildings with good building envelope construction. So like many of these measures discussed, winter humidification needs to be implemented holistically. And Scott's going to talk a little bit about going forward, final operational solutions.
Thanks a bunch, Mark. So, as we look at look at the physical solutions, and we're going to kind of surmise that here in a moment, there are also several different operational solutions that are definitely going to be required. There are many different agencies, three-lettered agencies that are out there that are providing various different policies and procedures depending upon where you are throughout the United States. State health departments are providing information out on a daily basis. Governor's offices are providing these briefings, and there's a lot of change out there relative to basic procedures that are being put in place as sort of COVID-19 unveils itself in whatever form it's coming and in how many different iterations it's going to be in. So the good thing is, I shouldn't say this. So the one thing that we have from a basic learning perspective is the coronavirus is around. It's been around for decades upon decades, and COVID-19 is the new strand, right? We did learn a lot from SARS back in the 2003 timeframe, and so measures are being put into place throughout the globe that really leverage some of that stuff that we've learned previously. And one of those places that we can actually do is with the equipment itself. And so yesterday I was in the airport and I saw people with all of these things on, which was very interesting. So gloves, goggles, shields, masks, and various different respiratory protections, which I thought was a bit overkill, seeing how there was only about 10 of us on an airplane. But we certainly do have a lot of PPE that's occurring. Now, in terms of use of various different types, for instance, gloves, I've received this information from infectious disease control experts that says literally washing your hands with hand and soap are more effective than necessarily wearing a pair of gloves. So more frequently washing would certainly be something that is advocated out there, as well as just then next using various high content alcohol hand sanitizers. But respiratory protections are being out there. They are used to protect other people from you. Should you sneeze, cough, anything along those lines. That's really the intent of what those are. And then we have a series of various different operational things. And so we've got reduced occupancies in a variety of different building types. And almost every building type that we are interacting with has a quantity of people that they are considering letting in. There are, as Jeff mentioned earlier, so kind of like the red, yellow, green, layering of levels of infection, and really how we can go about mitigating that, and being able to have the right amount of folks inside facilities. I'm not a giant fan of just the general wanding UV cleaning. That is not something that is, it's being sold really well by the janitorial companies, but it's definitely not something that's being advocated by the intellectuals across the country, saying that, the basic alcohol cleaning, soap, water, really makes more difference than UV cleaning does itself. Every drinking fountain, I think, in the United States has basically been closed off at this point in time. If not, certainly should be taped off. And, we see some long-term changes that are actually going to be coming with that for the building code itself. Jeff?
So kind of wrapping it up here, and I've been telling anybody that I've talked to about this that owns or operates a building, is implement the immediate measures that you're hearing about. Make sure that you're still adhering to the existing building codes, fire codes, health, safety, welfare codes, ADA codes, etc. But what we're going to see coming to fruition here with the legislation that's probably being worked on by government entities, both at a national, state, and local level, is permanent changes for the building code, both for existing buildings and for new buildings. And there have been certain historical events where they mandated that existing buildings be updated immediately. And there have been other ones, such as American Disabilities Act, where they gave you a long leeway to update. Most importantly, throughout history, the national government has not provided a lot of funding for the implementation of these new standards. And I'll use the example of the increased fire suppression requirements. Is you're basically doubling or tripling the cost of that system for a new or retrofit application, and it's mandated, but there's no cost for the end users or the owners of that. So if you're talking to your local legislation, your local government, make sure that as they're talking about funding for these type of COVID things, that it's beyond operational, it's beyond PPE, and it's about also, when we get to the finalized solutions, how do we actually pay for the concepts of individual rooms versus group rooms? That's going to create more square footage needs. You see the sanitizing stations that you have now, which are little pumps, but these are probably going to be more permanent. They might be plumbed very similar to like a sink, where they're always available. If you're in a restaurant, retail, hospitality, hotel environment, you literally are building your model, your pro forma on how many people you can serve, and if you're required to reduce those, how do we do that? It's usually more space or creativity of space, and again, those all things all cost. What I'm basically saying is be patient on the permanent changes that are going to be occurring, because there is a process, and we gave some historical examples of that likely process. This is not the first time that the built environment has reacted to a major event or events throughout the globe. And at some point, while me, Scott, and Mark are all at the forefront of implementing these immediate changes, we are kind of at the whim of waiting for the new building requirements to come out and truly understand where, for instance, does the 6 feet come from. I'm sure there's some logic in that. That's how far a sneeze can go, but we're creating such immense operational changes because of that 6 feet. And so do you see it turning to more where you always have a PPE on, and that allows for more people versus just saying, well, you have to have a mask on. In the city of Cleveland right now, you're required to have a mask on if you're outside. If you have a mask on, do you still need the 6 foot distancing? Because at that point, when you sneeze or cough, it stays within your mask. With that, we're going to open it up to questions. We will be sending out this webinar to all the GCP members that have attended, and we'll be providing our contact information along with a link to the AIA assessment that Scott really hit on. I'm assuming our moderator is going to jump back on and lead the question and answering session.
Sure. I'm sorry. I had a glitch. My computer just crashed and is restarting right now. So I'm sorry. That was a bit of a delay on that. Does anybody have any questions? You can type them into the chat box along the bottom.
Scott has that effect on computers, making them crash.
For some reason, there's 3 of us moderating and they all just, yeah. So hang on one second here. Sorry about that. Maybe we'll have a question pop up in the meantime.
Let me ask Mark one while you're while the audience is populating some of their questions. But Mark, you know, if you look at the UVC versus bipolar ionization within existing buildings, so just focus purely on existing buildings, help with filtration, et cetera, what direction do you go in as an expert? If you own the building,
bipolar ionization, you know, bipolar ionization we've looked at, and that seems to be a better option for retrofit applications. Requires less space, works better in moving air streams than UVC. UVC is best on surfaces. So that the cost is about the same. They're about 25 cents a CFM, you know, rough numbers installed. So that part's, you know, pretty equal. The effectiveness, the bipolar seems to be the most effective for moving air streams.
Thank you.
So I see a question here. What do you believe is the largest architectural and engineering hurdle related to COVID-19? I think, again, and I kind of talked about this a little bit, is the concept that there are going to be mandates from the government. We don't know what those are. Again, I think they're going to be probably related to Mark's expertise, which is mechanical systems infrastructure. And anytime you're evaluating and modifying existing conditions, mechanical systems, that is very, very costly. A lot of times architects, we don't like seeing those things, so we hide them behind walls or in closets or in shafts. So I think that the biggest long-term hurdle is making sure that the government is funding these type of things to make sure that we can actually cost effectively implement them without really harming the businesses that they're trying to ultimately help.
I'll jump on top of that and I'll take it from a different perspective. Certainly in the work environments that we have, you know, we've spent so much time talking about culture, talking about team building and creating certain types of business environments where we are attracting, retaining, recruiting people to these locations. And I think that there's going to be a significant balance because the inherent nature of people today is wall up. Right? I mean, get me a wall as big as you can so I don't have to be, you know, potentially interact with another person. So it's almost like going back 20, 25 years at this point in time, you know, where you're in an 8-foot by 8-foot cubicle with an 8-foot high wall and you get like no access to natural light, but you're safe inside your space. And, you know, creating that balance between, you know, the type of environment and the type of business that you've got compared to, you know, looking out for the safety and security of your folks, I think it's going to be really interesting over the long term and how that starts to manifest itself.
Okay, I have another question for you. What would you say is the rough budget cost for some of the measures that you presented here today? For example, bipolar ionization or UVC?
The bipolar ionization and UVC tend to be installed about 25 cents a CFM each. This is the rough number. You know, there's some fluff in there depending on the size. You know, lower CFM, obviously the cost goes up. But
Mark, can you not be an engineer for a minute? Because a lot of people don't know what CFMs are or cost per CFM. What about cost per square foot? Something that's a little more.
Yeah, that would translate to roughly 25 cents a square foot of building area. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, and another question is, what is the best process for implementation? For example, design build.
Scott, you want to take
design
build right now? I'm sorry, Scott, you want that one? Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to field it. So I think it depends upon what you are actually doing. So This dream team in front of you is working as criteria architect, design build on a lot of work right now, probably 70, 75 projects within Cuyahoga County itself, just that we're actively engaged in, and it's going to be delivered as a design build. I like the aspect of design build, especially as we're looking at sort of mechanical and plumbing systems. There's certainly the design assist that can come into play and really make it very quickly and effectively be able to be implemented, probably even a little bit more cost effectively than going a traditional design bid build route. Because right now, as we're looking at it, it's speed, right? And it's not jumping out too far ahead, but it really is trying to get the things done so that you can return to a more normative environment and making sure that it's safe for the people. And speed is key right now.
And I think that's interesting. It's one of the reasons that the two different firms got together is Scott and K2M and Mark, they're doing a lot of criteria work for the county. And we were actually hired as part of the back end of that design build as architect of record along with some contractors. And the county's committed $30 million updating their facilities. So they're out in front creating a lot of the initial concepts and basis of design. And then you got a group of about 8 contractors that will be picking up that work and moving it forward. So very, very interesting approach. It's definitely the fastest way to implement change.
Right. And we've got about 6-8 million square feet of space that we're just starting with the Department of Administrative Services. So all the state's large administrative facilities, and all of these things are going to be brought into play.
Great. Okay, is there anything you guys wanted to say in closing? Or if there's any more questions?
Pamela, this is Allison from GCP. I'm sorry, we do have one question that just came in. How do you see these implementations happening with respect to the tenant and owner relationship? Most major systems are managed by the building owners.
I believe that.
So when you get into, go ahead, Jeff.
So we both probably can answer it in probably different ways, different perspectives. You are correct in that a lot of the back of house is managed by the building owners, and there's going to be a different way of looking at this. And again, I go back to it's likely going to have to be investment by the building owners and or subsidies, because the performers of the tenants are so tight already. There's not a lot of room. I think I heard of statistics where most retail or hospitality restaurants only have about 2 months of cash flow behind them. So they don't have a lot of liquid money to do these kind of permanent upgrades. And I don't know if that means longer leases or if it means a little bit of increase per square foot, but ultimately I think it's going to be down to the building owners and hopefully potentially some subsidies from the government. Scott, do you have a different perspective on that? Okay, well, I want to appreciate and thank everybody. We appreciate and thank everybody for attending today. Again, I'm going to go back to architects and engineers have a duty, an oath to protect the health, safety, and welfare. This is a topic that is, I won't say we're excited about, but we are very interested in developing solutions that can be applied to, and we didn't hit on a lot of different typologies today. We didn't hit on manufacturing. We didn't hit on amusement parks. There's a lot of different things we're not hitting on, but if we can be a resource to any of you, or if you would like to follow up and maybe you have a different group, a Rotary group or anything like that that would be interested in this type of topic, which is, you hear a lot about the operational changes and the second spike of COVID. There are actual changes being put in place through the built environment, through architecture and engineering, that are helping us return to the new normal. Who knows what that is? I know that our firm, and maybe Scott can hit on how his firm is, but we were set up for distance working already. We already had several people working from home a couple days a week. We all went permanently working from home, and for me, that meant working from the office by myself. But when we returned back full time, our staff got together and we decided to work permanently forever, 2 days a week from home. And so that's really changing the way we do business and how we're going to do business. And so the new normal, who knows what that is, but we are working as architects and engineers to get us back or to what that new normal is. Anything to add, Scott?
Nope, that was perfect. So Jeff and Pam and all the GCP team, thank you very much for putting this together today and organizing it for us. It was great to be able to participate in it. And Mark, as always, appreciate your wise and sage counsel on the engineering systems, even though Jeff wants to hide you in a small box and have it at the wall. So Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Yes, thank you to our speakers today for sharing so much great information and insight with us. And thanks to all of you for participating in today's webinar. We hope you found this webinar engaging and informative. And if you have thoughts to share on it, please let us know. We have many upcoming webinars, so for more information on those and to register, please visit gcpartnership.com/events, and we will be sending all of you a link to this webinar so that you have it. This concludes today's session. Thanks again.
Thank you.